So I need a verbal consent that you are okay changing the protocol, or give me a thumbs
That's
up.
good.
Good.
I consent.
Yeah, I'm good too.
I'm recording this, so you are under like, on record right now. So. Are there any questions about the, before we start with transcendental aesthetic, about what we discussed in terms of introduction? The questions that were pertaining to the introduction in the question sheet that I gave, or any specific question about the introduction? The distinction between a priori or posteriori, pure empirical, synthetic, analytic, what transcendental philosophy is, which is not so much concerning with the objects, but the conditions under which those objects are possible. That's how he defines transcendental, among other things. Yeah. Now, in your protocols, you don't need to address very explicitly or very lengthily Kant's why Kant believes mathematical propositions are synthetic. You might have a hard time explaining something that you don't even agree with, but just recognizing that's what Kant says, that's all.
Wait, can you define his transcendental thing again?
Well, transcendental philosophy in general is Kant's terminology, excuse me, to refer to his own project in Critique of Pure Reason. And what distinguishes that transcendental is that we are not like a scientific discourse looking at objects. He says, we are looking at the conditions under which those objects are possible. Now, these are human forms of intuition and human concepts. So we are looking at the structure of human reason under the capacity of understanding, under the activity of understanding, and analyzing what makes objects of knowledge possible for human subject. And that's transcendental, sort of also delimiting reason, the capacity of reason, and the limits of knowledge. So that's transcendental. Now, transcendental is not sort of, it's confused with the transcendent, that which goes beyond. Transcendental, a best way for me in general to think about it, like there is something in front of you, like whatever, knowledge, right? So you step back and analyze the conditions of the possibility of that. I think that's the best, more sort of encompassing explanation of what transcendental philosophy is, the investigation of the conditions for the possibility of human knowledge. Yes, Daniel.
Doesn't he also like sort of make this?
You are getting cut off a little. Yeah, turn on your volume a little. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't he also like make this distinction? Yeah, about like transcendental thought and then like the system. Like he talks about the difference between like the system of transcendental thought versus like transcend like like when he's like the critique of pure reason is not necessarily equal to transcendental philosophy.
Well, it's not the entire system, but this investigates the conditions for the possibility. So whenever, for example, he talks about, when we talk about transcendental aesthetic, we are talking about metaphysical exposition versus transcendental exposition of the concept. Now, we'll talk about that specific difference. So we are really not going to, even Kant, I'm not really sure, have a complete grasp of the entire system of transcendental philosophy. We are not going to read the whole book, but also there are certain synthetic a priori propositions that this science has, but then there will be a metaphysics in which we are going to actually catalog all the actual questions, which he doesn't really do. So it's always, this is preparatory, so it is kind of preparing the conditions for deciding all the metaphysical or formerly metaphysical questions. But you need to be specific to passage where he says what he says with respect to the system, because that was in the, if you are talking about the general problem of pure reason, starting on page 59 and going like, how is metaphysics as a natural predisposition possible? And then the idea of division of a special science under the name of critique of pure reason. No, I'm not spending too much time on them because we are really not going to cover all of them, and it's going to confuse you unless you are a Kant scholar who knows all the sort of terminology and different parts of his text, etc. So we are just reading 174 pages of the first book. So I don't want you to get confused. But the best way to think about transcendental at this point for our purposes is conditions for the possibility. Now, philosophy is such that when you hopefully continue to read Kant on your own, which I'm not really sure that's a thing, but if you do that, then you are going to say, oh, what Firit said on page 120 was wrong. It is just a little bit of it, and it is incomplete, and that's great. You should just like negate that and then expand your knowledge, etc. But for our purposes and the papers and the protocols, transcendental could just mean, and it would not be completely wrong to say it's the conditions for the possibility of knowledge. I sound defensive, but that's fine. Yes, you don't need to raise your hands. Whoever unmutes themselves quickest can talk.
There's just a line that I don't really understand on page 10. Will it be okay?
Page 10?
Yeah.
There's a first edition. Okay.
Yeah.
Which paragraph?
The last paragraph.
Uh-huh. I
Where
know
is that?
no inquiry is more important for exploring the power we call understanding and for determining at the same time the rules and bounds of its use than those I have undertaken in the second chapter on the transcendental analytic under the title of deduction of the pure concepts of understanding. Yeah, that's it.
So, and just one or two lines below, he says that this study, however, which is designed to go to some depth, has two sides. I mean, the two sides of about the understanding, I guess, and it goes on like the one side refers to the object of pure understanding and is intended to establish and make comprehensible the objective validity of understanding's a priori concept. And I don't really understand this specific sentence, objective validity of understanding's a priori concept. So for me, objective is something empirical, and understanding's a priori concept is purely non-empirical. And
Okay.
just this specific sentence.
Well, I think that Kant's project is for knowledge to be possible. Concepts, pure concepts, should necessarily be applied to objects. Now, remember at the beginning of preface said, I think, yeah, in the second preface that if we make the assumption that our concepts are going to conform to objects, then we cannot really make any progress in the realm of metaphysics. Instead, the Copernican revolution, we need to see whether objects conform to our concepts. But objects conforming to our concepts is pure subjectivism, unless you demonstrate, as I said in the structure of the synthetic a priori proposition, why and how concepts make the experience of objects possible. Therefore, they have objective validity, not to the extent that they correspond to objects, which is an empirical point, but a transcendental point that they make object itself possible, Gegenstand itself possible. They open up the realm of objectivity for human beings for something to become knowledge. So we can, and his aim is, he said it, and if you accept it, then there is nothing more to say. Like, yes, concepts make experience possible, right? When you hear that, you should ask, how? Like, why? I never heard of this. What kind of a crazy transcendental philosophy is that? Concepts make objects possible? And he will have to demonstrate, that's why I say it is the most important project of the book, deduction. Namely, I should be able to demonstrate to you, to your rational satisfaction, that concepts do indeed make objects possible, hence they have objective validity.
All right. I think I get it.
So concepts are not just like logical, empty concepts, they are applied to objects. How are they applied? They make even the reception sensibility of objects possible. So even though he separates, as we already seen, sensibility from understanding. Sensibility is a power of humans to have receptivity, receiving, affected by the external world. Our understanding is actually to think. He says, without the contribution of understanding, the content of sensibility itself is not possible. But he has to know that. He has to demonstrate that. He cannot just say it and expect people to accept it.
Even the sensibility alone needs concept to actually work, operate.
To have cognition, yeah.
Cognition.
I mean, it's possible that sensibility without understanding can still hit from the external world, but that would not be perception and that would not be cognition.
Excuse me, does Kant make a distinction between the words sensibility and sensation, or are those generally the same thing?
Sensation is
the same thing?
Usually the terms refer to the content of it. Sensibility is a power, our ability to be affected from the external world. So we have 5 senses, like we are like closed in on ourselves, and then we open up to the world with our eyes, ears, hands, etc., and things affect me. I look at things, I see things. Now, it might be very, very different than how they actually are, and in fact, they are. I don't see the world as it is. Right? I mean, scientists tell me that whatever I see under this table has strange subatomic particles or also atomic particles rotating around each other in the body of the solid table that I see. I don't see those, but I am still affected by them because I don't make it up. I cannot control those perceptions. I'm passive. I receive them. I cannot just see what I like or what I think. I still see what I see. I cannot like, I want to see a big, beautiful cake in front of me right now. It doesn't happen. I just see the empty mug. I mean, I cannot necessarily, I'm passive in my perception. I see what is there to be seen. So that's sensibility. Sensation, and he uses different concepts, and we'll be clear about it. He uses appearances, he uses objects. The sensation is really the content of what we perceive through our senses. But understanding is discursive, and we'll talk about that once we start the part on analytic more explicitly. But anything about the introduction that we need to talk about more?
Could you explain the different, or maybe the definition of content, form?
Well, form is, I mean, as far as transcendental aesthetics is concerned, or even generally knowledge is concerned, content is stuff that we are affected by. So we receive stimuli, we call stimulus that today. We get sense data from the external world.
Mhm.
That's the content. Like I see red. Red is hitting me. That's the content. I see.
So that's our perception, right?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
he calls sensation, sensibility, but basically, yes, perception through the senses. Yes, because you can have like, I don't know whether you can have extra sensuous perception, but sense perception,
Mhm.
like seeing, touching. I hit my hand and it hurts
Mhm.
because there's stuff, and I can't smell anything, not COVID, but because a bad odor is in the air or something. So that's the content of my perception.
Mhm.
But the form of it is that in the case of sensibility, in the case of transcendental aesthetic, is like I perceive it in time. I perceive it through time. Time is the form because I don't perceive time. I just perceive the red cup. The red cup is the content, but
Oh,
space in which I perceive it is the form. That's the form of my intuition. My intuition, my being affected by the external world, is always in space and time.
so
That-
form is like the thing, like what he said in what we're gonna read next. Form is like how he said time is like the condition for our experience or something like that. So
Yeah.
form is like the thing that is the condition for the content to happen.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
And if you add condition for the possibility of the content to happen, it would be perfect.
Oh, sorry, can you say that last part again? Condition to the possibility for
Condition,
content to happen.
condition for the possibility.
Mhm.
Condition for the possibility of the content. Without the condition, the content is not possible.
So form is the condition.
Yes,
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, he's going to expose this in transcendental aesthetic, but with respect to space and time, it's a little easier to demonstrate that. But with respect to concepts, he has to demonstrate that. And the name of that demonstration is deduction. And that's what we are going to do. I mean, we are going to read the critique up until the end of that deduction, in which he needs to convince all of us that concepts are actually forms of our perception.
Great. Did you say you have COVID?
Not COVID. I can't smell because I'm like, I have sinus. It's not COVID, no.
Oh,
At least according to the test that I took yesterday. So, no, on Tuesday, and I'm taking again today. So we'll see. It's always like a slot machine. Like whenever you go to a test, like I always think like, am I forcing, am I like pushing my luck? Like I got tested maybe like 4 or 5 times, and of course they are independent events and you should not. But it's like, okay, well, I got 4 negative results. Now statistically, am I going to get a positive one? That makes you nervous. So I can understand why people don't want to get tested. Some people don't even like Like people I know that they don't need to get tested, they don't get tested. So anyway, so yeah, no, it's not. Loss of smell and like that you lose on the COVID, and I didn't have that for a long time because I'm always stuffed up and my stuffy nose. But it's not COVID, so yeah. Okay, anything else about the introduction before we move on to beautiful transcendental aesthetic? Do you want to take a break before the transcendental aesthetic, Will? Okay, let's just say 6 minutes. We start at 9:40. Perfect, okay. I want to start with the term aesthetic. Comes from the Greek term aistasis, which literally means sense perception. In Greek, the derivation is usually from the first person singular. So I perceive, I sense, and aistasis is a derivation from that. That sort of would make us think like when we say aesthetics, we always think about aesthetics in terms of beauty, art, etc. But its fundamental assumption is that something that is perceived, sensed. And in the modern use, perhaps the closest way in which we could understand that is how it gives us pleasure in perception. That which is pleasurable in perception is beautiful. And that's what Kant later on in his third critique talks about, critique of judgment, how we judge something to be beautiful, etc. But maybe that's the root. That's the root of the term. So it already has a connection to the theoretical philosophy because we analyze sense perception very mechanically in modern science, and it really doesn't matter what we see, the way in which we see it, right? So we can see the beautiful flower or blah blah, just like seeing a terrible car outside. So that doesn't matter. The mechanism is the same. There is no difference in terms of our perception of them. Now, and that's also the case for Kant. So there's content, and we'll mostly not talk about the content. As I said, like red mug, beautiful car outside, trees outside, whatever, the table, things that you perceive. Now, transcendental aspect of it is, as I tried to explain before, transcendental aspect of it is, what is the condition of this sensibility? What makes this condition, what makes this sensible object or perceived object possible? Now, I say object, there's a little bit of perhaps confusion. Of course, I don't bring about the object into existence. So it is given. So Kant fundamentally accepts this ontological premise, obviously, that like Berkeley, for example, would contest, that being is not being perceived. Being or objects already are given to us. So Kant accepts the fundamental human sort of material irreducibility. Yet they are not yet objects. They become Gegenstand for us, object of cognition, and legitimately can be known with the aid of forms of intuition and concepts. So those are the forms. Sometimes he calls forms of intuition. Sometimes he calls formal intuition. These are just simply space and time. And he explains why they are categorically different than concepts, why they belong to human sensibility, not to human understanding. Well, the way in which I present it sometimes at the beginning is that because we don't understand space and time, we don't know what they are. We really cannot, like, that's one of the if there is a perennial question of philosophy, that is one of them. What is time? And you know, we live in time, we measure it, we make appointments, we, you know, give deadlines, etc. And we sort of have an understanding that it is passing, but we really don't have any understanding of it, empirical, cognitive, or otherwise. It's a strange kind of, now I call concept, but for Kant, it's not really a concept, it is a form of intuition. So I will have that difficulty, I will perform this difficulty throughout the discussion. Space and time are forms of intuition, strictly speaking. They are not concepts. Concepts belong to understanding, they are discursive. And when he starts the transcendental doctrine of elements in terms of aesthetics, he makes pretty sure that it is sensibility that they belong to, not understanding. So in whatever way, by whatever means, a cognition may refer to objects, still intuition is that by which a cognition refers to objects directly. So intuition is the content of sensibility. Now this content is complicated because in this content there is both sensation, content from sensation, but it's also form. So whenever he says intuition, he is already referring to space and time as the forms of that intuition. So it's already a kind of a composite concept. So it's not exactly the content, but it is the combination of content and form. Daniel.
So like, oh my God, is form sort of like, sort of what structures, like, is form like this form would be is form like the structure of intuition?
You can say structure. It shouldn't confuse you trying to find words. Space and time, like we always, the way in which, the manner in which we perceive. We always perceive in time, and we always perceive from outside in space. Just simple as that. And don't, so that when I say forms of intuition, there are two, space and time, that's it. There are no other forms.
So what is the composite term?
Intuition.
Composition, intuition. So intuition is the composition of the content and the form together.
Well, sometimes he says pure intuition, in which case he is referring to space and time. Sometimes he says the sensation content of intuition. Then he is simply referring to what we receive from the external world. But we do not receive space and time from the external world. Space and time allow the possibility of receiving anything from the external world.
So can I put those two, pure intuition and sensational intuition, into a priori intuition and a posteriori intuition? Right. Are they, is pure intuition the same with a priori intuition? I mean,
yeah.
Are they?
Yeah.
And
pure intuition, form of intuition, formal intuition, they are all referring to space and time.
And empirical intuition, sensational intuition, a posteriori intuition, they point the, what do you say?
Stuff that we get from the
contents.
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't like empirical intuition and like sensational intuition, are they the same thing?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so like when I read this, I wasn't clear if he was making a distinction there, but like, is there like a difference between sensation and sensibility?
Well, as I explained it to Esther a few minutes ago, sensibility is the power of human being by affected. So if you read on page 72, the top, it says the capacity, a receptivity to acquire presentation as a result of the way in which we are affected by objects is called sensibility. That's the power, capacity. What we perceive are the sensations. Hence, by means of sensibility, objects are given to us. It alone supplies us with intuitions. Through understanding, on the other hand, objects are thought, and from it arise concepts. That's a separate transcendental analytic, which we are going to discuss later. But all thought must, by means of certain characteristics, refer ultimately to intuition, whether it does so straightforwardly or circuitously, and hence it must, in us, refer ultimately to sensibility, because no object can be given to us in any other manner than through sensibility. So you have 5 senses. Some people claim to have 6, which you shouldn't believe them. I mean, I don't know. 5 senses through which that we can know the external world. All our knowledge, cognition ultimately has to be traced back to experience.
So can it be the case that sensibility is acquiring the contents not from the external world, but from the inside?
Sometimes, of course, like inside, like, what do you mean? Like we have inner perception, like pain and nausea and
Uh,
um,
I meant something pure.
pure.
Yeah, in conscious term. I mean, no relation to the empirical world. Can we get something like that from the inside with our sensibility instead of getting something from the outside? Does it make sense?
Well, in terms of content, it doesn't. It has to be a content. If you talk about the sense of time and space along those lines, those are the only possibilities. But I don't experience time.
Okay.
I experience in time. Nobody experiences time. It's like, oh, time. Or, oh, I saw space. Or I felt time. No, you experience boredom. And therefore it is time slows down or whatever. Or you experience joy and then time feels like it is going faster, blah, blah. But you don't experience time itself. Inner out, even innerly, like you cannot sort of, even conceptually, that's difficult to wrap your mind around. Like, I perceive time. If somebody says that, they're probably misspeaking. That's called what Kant sometimes use this beautiful term, subreption, which I love. It's a beautiful term. You should learn subreption, using it wrongly. Not with respect to experience. Okay, so the effect of an object on our capacity, see, that's sensibility, on our capacity for presentation, insofar as we are affected by the object, is sensation. So it's content. Intuition that refers to the object through sensation is called empirical intuition. The undetermined object of an empirical intuition is called appearance. Undetermined here, it's always determined in cognition, but for analytic perspective, analytic reasons, he makes this undetermined object, which we don't really ever encounter anyway. Sometimes he calls it also in manifold. That is thinking of what we are affected independently of its forms, which is an abstraction, which is an analytic distinction, which we never have just manifold, but we can speak about it, namely our perception minus space and time. If you take space and time out of it, it's just stuff.
Could you explain that one more time?
Well,
The what undetermined appearance?
Well, you asked the question of determined, so you should really know this very well. The undetermined object is if you take out the determinations of space and time from what you perceive, then that's the stuff, like undetermined object appearance. Things appear. They appear to us always in space and time.
Is the undetermined object the thing in itself?
Oh, no. Well, yes. Oh, that's a hard question. Well, here he just says Gegenstand, undetermined object. This is a more technical distinction. Here it is the object of sensibility without space and time? You would say, wouldn't that be thing in itself? And you would be right, but let's just not go there yet.
Could it also like, I don't know, could it also possibly mean like when it like in the sense of like when we empirically intuit something, like the undetermined part is not necessary. Like I don't think he's saying like it's sort of like behind something in the way like thing in itself is, if that makes sense.
Well, it does make sense, but maybe thing in itself is not behind either.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's confusing here. I don't want to confuse you unnecessarily, but because what Uyan said would ultimately be somewhat correct, because that's undetermined. What does that even mean? Without the forms of intuition. But for here, it's just making like definitional distinctions so that things become clear. So he's trying to clarify it, not actually confuse you.
Okay.
Whatever in appearance corresponds to sensation, this I call it matter. Matter, you can also think about its content. But whatever in appearance brings about the fact that the manifold to appearance can be ordered in certain relations that I call the form of appearance. And they are going to be relations of time, relations of space. Now, that in which alone sensation can be ordered and put into a certain form cannot itself be sensation again. So Kant says the form of sensation cannot be found in sensation itself, the content. Therefore, it's just orderless. Like things are not in space and time in themselves as stuff, as matter. We need to put them, our mind has to put them in spatio-temporal order. Therefore, although the matter of all appearance is given to us only a posteriori, as you said, Tukmin, the form of all appearance must altogether lie ready for the sensations a priori in the mind, and hence that form must be capable of being examined apart from all sensation. So the insight for Kant, and this is going to be clear with respect to metaphysical exposition of the concept of space and time, is we cannot find the order of our sensation within our sensation. Because if we were, then that order would be contingent. It would not be universal. If the order of our perception, like time, for example, would come to us through content, through perception itself, then it would be possible for us to one day maybe perceive not in time or in reverse order or making leaps. So relations of time for us are universal and necessary, and precisely because of that, they cannot come from empirical sensation. Because as he says repeatedly, I can find multiple ways, empirical sensation never gives us necessary and universal connections. That he learns from Hume. We are going to go back to Hume a little bit later in the text to specifically his discussion of causality and connection and order within experience. If the order of experience would come from experience itself, namely the content of experience, then we would never have that order universally and necessarily. We would only have them contingently. But in the metaphysical exposition of space and time, he says that relations of space and relations of time are necessary and universal, could not have been otherwise.
Wait, so this order that you're talking about it's you're referencing the structure of our reason, of our cognition,
Our sensibility.
our sensibility.
Yeah. We are just talking about sensibility here.
So when you're saying the word order, does it mean possibility or condition that we've been talking about?
But also the actuality that I perceive one thing, and then I perceive another thing, and then I perceive another thing. I don't perceive things all at once. My perception is temporally ordered. And I always perceive in space. I don't, I mean, even holograms and stuff are, I think, in space. Like, I don't perceive free floating objects outside of space. Whatever that means, I don't even know what that means.
Could you describe Hume's um, thought process again? I didn't
Um,
quite understand that.
But Hume, being a radical empiricist, really says what Kant says with respect to the nature of empirical cognitions, namely, whatever they have been, they can always be otherwise. And if we cannot trace certain concepts to perception, we cannot justify them. So when we talk about the concept of causality, for example, Hume says, I never perceive cause-effect relationship. I perceive one event after another event in time. Therefore, I form a habit to think that they are causally related to each other. This is a famous example of constant conjunction. If certain things constantly go together, then I attribute a causality to them, but it is not justified because I don't really saw cause, C1, effect, E1. I don't see that. I just see two separate events. And I mean, we can jump ahead, which I don't know whether it will be useful. I'm going to, uh,
Is that the distinction between noumena and phenomena, like those two realms? Does that have anything to do with that?
where did you get that?
I'm connecting another thing that I read before, but like the two realms of phenomenology or phenomena deals with appearances and perceptions, right? It's the events that we perceive and interact with. And then noumena is like the undetermined, the is the thing in itself or the Gegenstand, is that, or not, sorry, the other one.
Okay.
Ding
Ding
and
on the.
Zeesh, I think. The things that exist. Yeah, yeah. Does that lie under that umbrella of noumena? Like,
Yes, but I mean, you made a
okay.
huge leap, so I'm not really seeing the connection, but yes.
Oh, yeah, it's not a leap in the reading. It was something other that
Okay.
I'm reading, but yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
I mean, usually, like, you have a PDF. The best thing is to do a search for the word for you to see it in the context, because people read certain things in a context and then they take them out of that context and sort of say that's what Kant's point is, etc., and they might misrepresent it. So just look at the occurrences of what Kant says about noumena if you want to understand what noumena means for Kant. But in general, yes, Ding an sich, noumena, we associate them beyond the realm of sensibility, but about cognition, but he uses them as technical terms, namely, noumena is that world within a specific context. And Ding an sich, yes, refers to beyond our sensibility and understanding, but within a different context. Because with Ding an sich, he is going to ground moral philosophy. Sometimes he used the word of understanding and the word of sensibility when he talks about the distinction between moral and theoretical philosophy. But noumenon, yes, it's also related to the question of practical philosophy. Okay.
Wait, so real quick, then you were saying, so that if the order of our experience of the sensibility came from sensations empirically, then it wouldn't be universal. That's what you were saying, right? Yeah, okay.
And it would be a contingent order. Therefore, we would allow the possibility that one day we would not perceive in time, if time were to come from sensation. So the whole thing hinges on the fact that Kant's conviction through Hume that nothing universal and necessary can come from empirical experience. And this is ultimately the kind of predicament of scientific inquiry. It's not that you are wrong in the sense that your perception of wrong, but there is something contingent and particular in your experience that can always be otherwise. So scientific method might be completely right and great production of knowledge, etc. But to the extent that it is empirical, you always leave the possibility of the things that change. So, and also, this is like whatever findings that we have about climate change, for example, ironically, if we are successful, if we reverse the effects of climate change, they are going to be different. And we'll have less carbon emission or, CO, whatever we are putting into the atmosphere. So that's why, it's always kind of like when a philosopher argues with a scientist, it's always nice because however great, correct they can always be wrong. And if they say they cannot always be wrong, then they are being dogmatic. Hence, though, there is really no empirical scientific possibility of explaining time either. And that's really the consequence of Kant's insight, namely our discussion of our understanding or our sensibility with respect to time is not a scientific discussion, because scientific discussion would make observations in time which would already presuppose what it is supposed to explain. So you cannot empirically explain time. So you are always explaining it, at least transcendentally for Kant, but more so conceptually for Hegel and later philosophers. So when physicists discovered what time is, I laugh, I chuckle. It's like that is already a wrong, clickbait. Well, I mean, most clickbaits are stupid anyway, but scientists discovered where time is coming from. It's like, shut up. Just like, no. They can do it to the extent that they act like thinkers and philosophers, sure. It's not in the monopoly of only philosophers, but it's not science. It is a different mode of analysis. No, so, okay. So we covered matter, we covered appearances. So all presentation in which nothing is found that belongs to a sensation, I call pure. So that, it's not in the sensation, in the transcendental sense of the term. So pure condition for it. Accordingly, the pure form of sensible intuitions generally, in which everything manifold in experience is intuited in certain relations, will be found in the mind a priori. This pure form of sensibility will also itself be called pure intuition. So sometimes he says pure intuition, sometimes form of intuition, sometimes formal intuition. So this is the domain of transcendental aesthetic. What is it in our sensibility that doesn't belong to the content of our sensibility, which is a priori pure, universal, necessary? And that's the transcendental aesthetic. Okay. So he raises these questions with respect to space on page 77. um, we'll mostly concentrate on time because he says time is the form of all intuitions and space is the time of outer intuitions. That distinction should be pretty straightforward, right?
Say it again.
The time is the form of all intuitions. Space is the form of outer intuitions. So therefore, time is the form of both outer and inner intuitions. And by inner intuitions, I'm not really sure exactly what he is referring to, but I always imagine things like pain. And I mean, pain is still kind of local, like your foot hurts, for example, but you don't really feel that pain by looking at your foot. You just feel it inner, I think, right? I mean, but you also have like an inner connection to it through touch, I suppose, but it's part of your body. So these are complicated questions, but like time is definitely the form of all intuition. There's nothing that is not in time, even if you perhaps think that there are things that are not in space. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, the way like I read the inner outer thing was like space directed outer usually just sort of has to it's what allows like external objects to like stand before us, and then like time and the inner thing, I guess like things like, for example, like self-reflection was the example that came to my mind like initially, sort of like.
But don't you think self-reflection is thinking?
Yeah, yeah, it is, but I think it's still, I mean, like in terms of its form, like time is like
Yeah,
I don't
but it
think
has to be
space.
sensibility. So you need to give me something that I sense that is in space, in time, but not in space.
Space. Okay, okay.
What would that be?
Self-reflection. Say, I don't know. Okay, the feeling of boredom.
Yes, I think that's a perfect boredom. Yeah, I mean, what do you feel? I don't know, but hopefully in time because I won't be bored forever. So yeah, that would be boredom. Yes. What else do you feel? How do you feel? Inner, but not outer. And that's a very difficult opposition too. Like, I don't even know whether there is anything inner to what? Inner to our body, inner to our mind. Like, what is the inner part? Kant is not very clear on that. Inner intuition. What is that? Boredom makes a little bit of sense, but would pain be part of it, or like I would imagine since it belongs to external intuition, music still is outer because the voice is coming from the external world. So even though it is not space, I mean, we always usually sort of, not always usually, either always, usually privilege vision. And we say like this object in front of me in space that I can see, etc. But things become much more complicated, inner and outer, when it is about music or smell, or because there's really, I mean, there's still physical external existence, I suppose. Um,
Can inner intuition be the cognitive process they were dealing right now itself, or just
that
the,
was Daniel's suggestion too, but
yeah,
it's
and
not,
yeah.
because that's a process of thinking.
Yeah, that would be like understanding, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Or
yeah.
even reason. I want sensibility, like something that I'm affected innerly.
Or not the whole cognitive process, but just the the earlier part, which deals only with perceptions and, you know, without understanding, only the earlier part of cognitive process. Can that be the inner part?
Sure, that's why we are looking for an example in sensibility. What you are talking about is sensibility, yes. So what do I sense innerly that I don't sense outerly? And Daniel suggested boredom, which is, yes, cool. Like, I like that. Or like psychological feelings, I suppose. Like
I mean,
feeling of
mm,
happiness. Is that really a sensibility? Yes. I mean, I feel innerly very happy and joyful, but that's still in time, and it will end, and I'll still feel crabby
I mean,
afterwards. So whatever.
not
So,
the emotional part, but this automatic process of, you know, how should I say, of sensibility working on its own.
yeah, I think that maybe that would be a meditation or something. I mean,
Yeah, something like that.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's hard, but it doesn't matter, because time works. Time works as the form of outer intuition too, so it's fine. So the first thing that he says is important, that space is not an empirical concept. And the reason for that is the same as that time is not an empirical concept, because it cannot be abstracted from outer experiences. For the presentation of space must already lie at the basis in order for certain sensations to be referred to something outside me. And it must similarly lie at the basis in order for me to be able to present these sensations as outside and alongside of one another. So only through the presentation of space is that outer experience possible in the first place. So this is this is, strictly speaking, a transcendental exposition. I mean, I don't know why he calls it metaphysical exposition, but without the presentation of space, you cannot have any sense of an object outside of you. But one of the reasons, I mean, I'm going to jump to 3 now, because technically that makes more sense. Space is not a discursive, or as we say, universal concepts of things as such, rather it's a pure intuition. So that actually explains why space is not a concept very well, because we can present only one space. And then we speak of many spaces, we mean that only parts of the one and the same unique space. So with concepts, you all read Plato to a certain extent, like any empirical concept or any kind of discursive universal concept, like a book. This is a book, that is a book, that is a book, they're all one book. But this book is not this book, right? We are going to see that with Hegel more explicitly. But when you have particular things and then you come up with a concept, you say, have you ever read a book? And somebody says, which one? It's like, just book. Do you read books? Like, but which one? That's a book, that's a book, that's a book. And they are separate entities which are subsumed under one general category. Book, the book, whatever. Space is not like that. In space, this space and that space are not separate spaces. It is given as an infinite magnitude that they are all part of one space. And that's it. I mean, the space here is not like any different than any other space. So it's not a concept, because concepts behave differently. Concepts fall under a general heading, and they are different from each other. Specific books that fall under the same concept are abstracted and made into a concept those particular things are different from each other. But we cannot talk about spaces. We don't talk about different spaces. We say different places to the extent that they are occupied by objects, but the concept of space, which is not a concept, is the same for all. So do you see the difference between like a book, a blueness, or any other concept that is abstracted from the particulars, and space is not such?
For me, there's like, so I sort of want to go back to one thing. I think it's page 73, where he's like, I don't know, like he's making the argument, but like the more we talk about like space and all this, like, how possible is it really to have presentations that nothing belong? Like there is no sensation whatsoever to them. Like, because like even like all these examples we're giving, like even boredom and like I get the sense there's still some kind of like sensation going on when we make those examples as examples of like just space and time.
That's
so like,
go ahead.
Yeah, so just like I guess I went back to that thing I mentioned earlier about sensation and sensibility. Like, how well does he execute that split
Between sensibility and sensation, you said?
Yeah, because I feel like insofar as we sort of like mention it, like there is still to some degree some sensation contained in even like in the way he's talking about like even space and time, if that makes sense.
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Are you saying that he is not explaining that, you think, or I'm not clear with the question.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'm not sure he's explaining like the like I don't see like the full committing, let's say, to that sort of like cleavage between the two, if that makes sense.
Between what?
The two, like having presentations that nothing whatsoever belongs to sensation. Because even earlier he talks about how like presentations are yeah, like presentations sort of deal with I forget to this, they still deal with sensation in some sense.
But I'm not really sure. I mean, if I'm understanding your question correctly, yeah, I would say yes, but that would not be an objection to Kant, because yes, we never have pure sensibility without sensations. It is a conceptual distinction in the sense that we separate the capacity from actuality. So just for example, we both have the capacity to see, right? But you see the little writing on the wall across the street, and I don't. Your sensation with respect to your capacity is different than mine, because your capacity, even though we both have the capacity, and if I get closer, I might be able to see it, etc. That I have the capacity, but I don't have the actual sensation, whereas you have the capacity and you have the actual sensation. So that's maybe like a logical distinction between sensibility and sensation. In actuality, yes, we never have pure space. We never have pure time. So he is just merely making a distinction that is not ever occurring. So he says, take out everything, you cannot take out space. What does that even mean? Like, I don't understand. So we need to approach it from the other side and say, we have all our sensations, outer sensation in space. Then you say, well, what about things that are not in space? It's like, no, You cannot have that. So he is entertaining this as a thought experiment, but that never really occurs. And you never really, you can never really perceive pure space. Everything is always in space. So he says that should be a form, not a content, because content is always contingent, but this form is universal and necessary. So he's arguing from the other side, because you never really just like, he says, you never really perceive space. Hence, if you take everything out, there will still be space. And you say, well, how can you take everything out? You can't. But even if you do, you cannot take out space. But if something is empirical, you should be able to take it out. You cannot take out space. Hence, space is not the content. It is the structure of our power, namely sensibility. Yes, Esther, sorry.
I had a question about space versus like not space in a scientific point of view, but you just answered my question. So thank
Okay.
you.
So you're right, like in spirit, that is not an actual distinction. That's an analytic distinction that he makes in terms of pure definitions. Okay, so therefore it is an intuition. So it belongs to our sensibility. It doesn't belong to our thinking. So it's not a concept. It is not an issue of understanding, but it's an issue of intuition. Now, that's why it's not a concept. So all you need to understand that concepts fall under a category, general category. Space is not like there's a big space and that there are small spaces within it, or they fall under the space. They are all one magnitude. Therefore, space is a necessary presentation that underlines all outer intuitions. We can never have a presentation of there being no space, even though we are quite able to think of there being no objects encountered in it. Think, not perceive. I don't think that we can actually perceive empty space. Well, I don't know. You can't perceive empty space. You can maybe perceive an empty room or empty. You can like just pure, like, in maybe in Matrix, there was that scene, like, just pure white screen, and then you can project anything you want to it, something like that. Yeah, Esther.
So this is actually the question I was going to ask. Does space necessarily have to have substance in order to be space? Because I'm thinking I might, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Substance in it, you mean?
Yes, like, there's the Kant talked about it, I think, in the preface or something like that, how we perceive space through having this idea of substance, like this table has substance and so it's in space.
Huh.
And so my question was, if you leave Earth and you're in outer space, you're in I don't know what else to call it but space, but
Space.
yeah.
Cannot be space.
But it's not, but there's nothing in it, like it's a vacuum. Is it still considered space then, if it has no substance?
I mean, there's probably like gases, atmosphere, air, etc. There's something that I cannot maybe see, like a stuff, like an object, but just like this room, like, in art, they refer to this as the negative space. It's still space, but negative space, the space with respect to the relation of the objects. Like this room, there are a bunch of objects in it, but there is more emptiness in terms of I can see than objects, right? So if I put all my stuff together, it will make like 1/5 or 1/10 of the space that actually exists here in terms of volume that I can measure. But the point is, like, even if you go to imagine ourselves going to the deep structures of the universe and, like billions of years, light years away, our perception will still be in space. We are not going to all of a sudden, I mean, I don't even know what that even means. I mean, I can say it, like, we will perceive not in space. I don't know. I mean, it's not possible for me to even imagine it. It's a purely discursive possibility. I say it, but I cannot. If you can, maybe you can describe it, because what does it mean to perceive not in space?
I think that's the distinction of why space is not a concept, right? That's what you were saying. It's simply because we cannot sensibly create that concept of not in space. That space is an intuition and not this external or thought or idea or anything like that. I mean,
Yes.
even trying to come up with a description of not space, I don't think you can, because space is not a concept.
Yeah.
It's not something that can have a not space or
Exactly.
have a antithesis. Yeah.
But I mean, it still remains as a mysterious idea, let's say, space and time especially too. But he just sort of makes certain qualifications within that mystery. So the only qualification for our purposes is that we do not perceive it, hence we cannot treat it as a concept. Because concepts usually have, pure concepts even, but like especially empirical concepts, have some empirical manifestation. So I see space, I see space, I see space, and I make a space. No, it doesn't work that way. How does it work? It works as an infinite given magnitude, which is a very mysterious thing to say for Kant. Infinite given. Well, if it is given, it must be finite. So, but now it's true that every concept must be taught as a presentation that is consented. This is on page 79. An infinite multitude of different possible presentations. Hence, the concept contains this presentation under itself. That's the concept. Like there could be infinite books, so infinite blue, but they are all under the concept. But no concept as such can be thought as containing an infinite multitude of presentations within itself. Not under it, but within itself. That is space. Within itself, there is infinite, like this space, that space, like it's infinite now. I think it's better actually to say that it's indefinite, but he says infinite, whatever. Yet how we think space for all parts of space ad infinitum are simultaneous. Therefore, the original presentation of space is an a priori intuition, pure intuition, form of intuition, not a concept. So that's the only specification that we really need, that, but also that they don't belong to objects. They don't belong objects in themselves. They belong objects to the extent that they're objects for us, because it is transcendentally ideal, even though it is empirically real, as he says later. Yes, it is the condition for empirical objects, but just because we provide it doesn't make it any less valuable. In fact, it makes it more valuable, because it makes it universal and necessary, upon which we can build a priori proposition. So subjective here, as we understand it in the 20th century, something that varies according to the individual. It's not. It's not something that varies according to the individual, like subjective in that sense, but subjective in the sense that it belongs to human sensibility, which is universal. No one has extra sensuous perception. All human beings are restricted to 5 senses. Now, of course, you can be into other things and think about different perceptions, etc. But from a scientific perspective in which we are going to make knowledge possible, Kant says our sensibility is universal. I mean, some people might obviously have better manifestation of that power. Like, you get, I can see very well. Maybe there are multiple voices that you can produce in your cell phone that your dog can hear, but you cannot hear. So our sensibility sure is limited depending on who we are, but it is the same power. And even like there are interesting cases of people like synesthesia. I don't know whether any one of you has it. So you can have crisscross of your content of your perception, in the sense that you can smell colors or see tastes and things like that. But they are still within R5. I don't even know what like extra perception could mean. I mean, that I cannot even imagine either.
I know in Buddhism they consider, or in some traditions they consider consciousness to be the sixth sense.
I mean, sense your own consciousness, or do you perceive my consciousness?
Your own consciousness.
Okay. Sure. I mean, but that's a little bit more conceptual, I would say, even though you can have some meditative, more sensuous relationship to it. Sure. I can understand that. But that's still in time, and that's cool. Okay, so that was space. And then he says transcendental exposition of the concept of space, which he already did. So the only thing that maybe adds here is that this is going to contribute to the constitution of synthetic a priori propositions. And it is going to be actually mostly through time, not through space, that he is going to reconstruct the possibility of, or just construct the possibility of synthetic a priori propositions. So there is something, remember S is P, so we are talking about S. In S, there is a form that is pure. That sensibility, the subject that comes from us from experience. So space and time, especially time, are absolutely necessary because he wants to demonstrate that P is the condition for the possibility of S, but P is going to shape S in terms of form, not in terms of content. Remember, SSP, synthetic a priori proposition, right? That's what we are trying to come up with. And it can only happen if it is not empirical, that it is still synthetic in the sense that P is the condition for the possibility of the perception of S in the first place. But in order to demonstrate that, which he will fully do in the end of deduction, you need to rely on the pure elements within transcendental aesthetic, and that's space and time.
So, for example, if we were to say like, I don't know, like this mug is here or something, like that in that proposition, the here, like and like the here part, like is that, or would you say? Oh, I'm getting lost now in my own. Like just in terms of the SP thing, I'm trying to like think about it in like just a regular sentence, like ordinary language example.
But that's an empirical sentence anyway. So it can never be a priori.
So this is just for propositions in general, like synthetic, the fact that they're like they doesn't have to refer to anything in the real world, kind of.
They might be empirical. If they are empirical, in which the way in which the predicate is connected to the subject is through experience. So this mug is here is an empirical a posteriori and synthetic statement, because it doesn't belong to the nature of the mug to be here. I say it is here because I connect the spatial location through experience, whatever here means, like on the table, let's say. Right? That's a synthetic a posteriori statement. I'm not going to give an example of synthetic a priori statement, but every change has a cause is one of them. Cause is not empirical. It's not an empirical concept. It is not contained within the change, so it is not analytic, hence it's synthetic, but the connection between them is not made through experience, because I don't look at all the changes and try to make an empirical connection. How it is possible is if I can somehow demonstrate to you that cause is the condition for the possibility of the perception of every change in the first place, then it would be synthetic a priori. But cause is a pure concept, not an empirical concept. And there are pure concepts on page 132, 12 of them. We'll only concentrate on one. And they are derived from our ability to make judgments. And the table of judgments are on page 124. So don't confuse, just follow Kant. It will be pretty clear pretty soon, in a couple of, maybe in a week or so. Now, the problem is, of course, people objecting to Kant and saying like, well, I mean, if space is a pure of our, pure intuition, is the pure form of our intuition, then it doesn't belong to objects, then it's not objective. Then you can just say anything. And Kant says, actually, when we make necessary universal statements about space, we are really talking about the possibility of having any kind of experience in the first place. So it has nothing to do with the experience itself in the sense that we don't derive it from experience, but just because it is subjective, and precisely because it is subjective, it can be universal and necessary. So this really requires maybe sort of for you to reevaluate the way in which you were thinking about the opposition between subjective and objective. Because we look for stability, unchangingness, necessity from objectivity. That's how our minds are kind of wired historically for some reason, but it's wrong. It's actually, the idea through empiricism is that you can never get anything stable from experience. And I love the fact that people make this kind of confusion all the time. Like, you can understand this with respect to how we consider facts. Like, these are facts. Facts are facts. Facts don't change. Yeah, well, they do. That's the definition of facts. They change. But facts are facts. Like, yeah, but facts are facts for the time being. And that's really our problem, right? I mean, you insisting dogmatically on the unchanging character of the objective knowledge is misplaced. Objective to the extent that it comes from experience. Our knowledge of it comes from experience. So that's why, I mean, we really need some kind of epistemological clarity to deal with our problems in the 21st century concerning facts and news and all that. Actually, it's not that complicated. But yes, oh, I don't know what is a fact. I don't know what is, like, everything up is down. No, it's not. You're just like overwhelmed by empirical information that can always be otherwise, unfortunately. So you shouldn't really build your life on that. and things change pretty quickly too. That makes it a little bit even more difficult. I mean, in fact, maybe in the past, things changed slowly.
Do you think Kant was writing to try, I mean, his motivation was to find something stable,
Sure, of course.
to find something universal?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in that particular sense, as Kevin Miles would describe it, he was a metaphysician. Yeah. But he believes he's not. He's just describing human capacity, not objective reality.
Has anybody ever written on like his, like, is he looking for security in life, or is this for the benefit of the species? Like, what's,
I mean, why do you do philosophy? I mean, I don't know. Like, he's a philosopher, among other things, mostly. Um, he he is obviously responding to his time, where there's rationalism and empiricism, sort of this, uh, what do you call this, like cul-de-sac, or sort of a problem that you cannot get out. Like, is it coming from us, or is it coming from the external world? Of course, we are receiving a lot of new information from the external world at the time that sort of fascinates people, and it makes it powerful. Even today, we believe like science that constantly receives information from the external world is the most powerful discourse. But on the other hand, it doesn't deliver the security that it promises because things change. So if you continue to rely on science, the chances that you are going to be wrong at some point, not with the scientific method, but with the content of the empirical observation. So yes, he is trying to produce some kind of conceptual consistency, conceptual clarity, stability, sure. And a kind of map to understand our relationship to the world. I mean, basic philosophical um, concerns. Yeah, and wants to talk about morality and a certain kind of hegemony, of course, that we can notice subsequently that he is trying to instill, and in the process, putting the seeds of European Union as we understand it in the 21st century. He's doing that too, both politically and from his moral perspective, and moral philosophy. So yeah, I mean, but I mean, as I repeatedly say, he is also a what we would consider to be a terrible racist and white supremacist and Eurocentric boy. So, and he never left Königsberg apparently, and he just talks about all the people around the world from his witness statements and things like that. So I don't know why he's doing, like, I don't really, I mean, I thought of this yesterday. Okay, I'm not recording this, yeah. So even if I talk about things that are ahead in terms of reading, it's already connected. So most of the discussion that we had with respect to space is kind of mirrored, parallel with respect to time. So time is not an empirical concept. Time is a necessary presentation that underlies all intuitions, not just outer intuitions. It has an a priori dimension, as we mentioned earlier, a priori necessary, and it is sequential. It could be simultaneous, but it is sequential. It is not a discursive universal concept, just like space, because different times don't fall under the concept of time, but they are part of the same time. And he says something more clarifying here on page 86. To say that time is infinite means nothing more than any determinate magnitude of time is possible only through limitation put on a single underlying time. So it is, I like the term indefinite. The more you, like, you know, you cannot find like the end of time or the end of the beginning of time or something like that. It is indefinitely, without define, like without limits. It is given as a magnitude, and you can in your mind always move further in time, and the more you move, it will always be given to you more. But to say infinite is kind of making a leap in terms of, that it has no bounds. Like, anyway, if it makes sense to you, indefinite and infinite, to the extent that you understand the distinction, it might be useful to say indefinite. So it's given us as a magnitude. Infinity is more sort of a metaphysical concept in my mind, like God and, blah, blah. But so it is not an objective thing. That's crucial, because if it were objective, it would be limited and it would be definite. So therefore, time is not something that is self-subsistent or that attaches to things as an objective determination, and that hence would remain if abstracted from all subjective condition of our intuition of it. So you can never really have like pure perception of time ever, because it is not something that is perceived. So it is the form of all our inner sense, of hence all our sense, hence inner sense and outer sense. It's the condition for all appearances. So again, transcendentally, what time means is that it is the condition for the possibility of all appearances. Hence, he again uses this famous expression, empirically real, transcendentally ideal, empirical to the extent that it concerns objects for us in terms of Gegenstände, objects of perception. It's objective, it's empirically real. But it is not something that we learn from the objects themselves, because it is not something that we learn through experience, because it's a priori. Consequently, it's universal. Consequently, it's necessary. And all the statements that we make about time are, not empirical time, like now it is like 11:36 or something like that, but time is one-dimensional. That's a synthetic, that's an a priori statement. The structure of time as one-dimensional is not like, oh, so far as we experience time, it is one-dimensional. So far, time is moving towards the future or leaving the past behind. The time is like this, linear. No, it's linear, period. It's not linear to the extent that we observed. So that linearity of time, for example, is a universal and necessary statement, not a condition, not an empirical objective statement. So, and the elucidation part of transcendental aesthetic is really not adding anything to the discussion. They are saying space and time define objects for us in relation to us. And he makes a clear distinction with respect to sensibility and understanding. And he wants to make sure that those faculties are treated separately, and space and time do not belong to understanding, but they belong to sensibility. So he reiterates that point. And then he talks about the transcendental object as not in relation to, or that which exceeds that space and time that we designate sometimes as X. You don't need to worry about that too much as you read that section. He makes a distinction between appearance and illusion. Obviously, our contribution of space and time to our intuition doesn't make it into an illusion. Obviously, it's just the structure of our minds. We always have this kind of immediate impulse to say, well, if we always perceive in space and time, how would it be not to perceive in space and time? And Kant says, well, that's always thinking that we are making a mistake if we contribute anything to experience. But in fact, we are not only not making a mistake, we are actually making experience possible. we'll talk about that business of mistake more explicitly in Hegel too. Now, again, our intuition is always sensible, and he contrasts that with original in the sense that we don't have intellectual intuition. We cannot really produce intuitions on our own. We are always at the mercy of the intuitions that come us from the external world through our sensibility. So, yes, Daniel.
Yeah, no, just like that. Again, so if I'm understanding this right, we are sort of we don't have intellectual intuitions because we can't like produce intuitions from our own
Well,
head.
except for sometimes mathematics, but even
Yeah,
mathematics,
that's why I was going to say, like, his math examples just kind of confused that for me a little.
well, in metaphysics, he says, we cannot produce, like we cannot produce empirical, like if we could produce triangles in the world, then that would be an intellectual intuition. But we don't produce triangles.
Don't engineers do that?
What?
I feel like don't like engineers do that? Like when you're building like a bridge or something, won't you have to?
But I mean, it's not a triangle because it's three-dimensional. I mean, it's in space. So you cannot, I mean, can you produce a two-dimensional object in space?
Are you saying that once a triangle becomes three-dimensional, it's something like a pyramid?
Well, I don't know whether
Describing like a three-dimensional object as opposed
Yeah.
to like,
I mean, in geometry, a triangle is a two-dimensional object, if I am understanding Euclidean geometry correctly. So by definition, it cannot be produced in space. We only have representations of triangle, something that looks like a triangle, but it's not something that we produced a pure object of geometry in the world. I don't know, maybe they do now. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that would mean, but to produce a non-three-dimensional object. That would exceed the necessary dimension of space.
what about like the image though? Like when people do like 3D rendering and stuff like that, like
Yeah, that's a good, yeah, like
even though physically, like, I mean,
Yeah.
even just the image, right? But like I guess there's something to be said about like the space of that image, the space within the image.
Well, that like where is that image? Like where is your image on the computer? Like you know, we can talk about like the image like right in front of me right now. So is that necessarily three-dimensional? I don't know, on the computer screen. I don't know. I mean, this is a very I can't answer those. Like I don't really know. Like computer-wise, like I don't know, like virtual reality. Like, are you, Will, in the same space as the picture behind you? Are they juxtaposed? I mean, I know your background is not a mountain, so I know you are not in front of a mountain, but you look like that to me. So I don't know, like for Kant, this is really a very concrete Newtonian physical world. It is not the virtual world of images. I don't even know whether he had like, I mean, he has printing. Does he have like photograph even? When was photography? I'm so ignorant about it.
When what?
When was the first photography possible or invention?
Late 1800s.
Really? So he doesn't even have photography. He died in 1804.
He has painting though, no?
Painting, yes, but painting is three-dimensional.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I don't know that, yeah. So yes, there's definitely painting, sculpture, etc. But again, a physical world, it's a beautiful world, like physical objects and no virtual anything, no photography, no cinema, no, I mean, sometimes I wonder how our existence would be like if we had no images. No computers, definitely no internet, no.
Well, people reproduce images by themselves, like mentally. So, I mean, we would still have image.
Not, yes, but I would, I mean, I cannot physically show the image that I have in my mind to you. I mean, I still don't, but like I can show images to other people without physically being present. Right? Like this in the computer. I don't know. Like,
Well, when you, so like there's, I think Alan Moore does this, the guy who wrote Watchmen, but he says something about how via language, right, you can reproduce the image in your mind. I mean, obviously flawed, but you can still reproduce. Like if I tell you to think of an apple and then I describe it to you, the apple is red, the apple is shiny, the apple is a Macintosh, the apple has a stem and a leaf, then you reproduce that image, the thing that I'm thinking of in your mind via language.
sure.
Isn't that what literature is?
Sure, definitely. But that's still kind of physical in terms of, I mean, all this discussion is whether I am producing an intellectual intuition. Namely, when I think of something, does it become an intuition for me? Like when I say, I don't know whether this is the correct example, but like if I say Pegasus, and then there's all of a sudden a flying horse in front of me, that would be God, I think. I mean, I can think it in my head or even put those images in my mind. I can say horse, flying, put them together, flying horse, Pegasus, etc. But I can't make it into a intuition outside. Although, I don't know, can you construct a flying horse cross species? I don't know. Maybe human beings can do that, like mating flying animals with horses. And I don't know whether that would be Pegasus. Anyway, this is, yeah, stupid. So, okay. So that's time. Again, just to remind, we are at that synthetic a priori proposition where we are talking about S. Now we are going to start talking about P with the logic, and that's the second part, transcendental logic. Logic as such is talking about, again, sensibility and understanding, and then he's going to start the proper part, the transcendental analytic, and that's going to be the analytic of the concepts. So these are all mostly definitions. Now we are moving from sensibility to understanding. We are talking about discursive, we are talking about concepts, we are going to talk about empirical and pure concepts. Pure concepts would be categories, and he is going to define all these terms. Now we are talking about concepts that are necessary for us to have experience. Forms of intuitions are necessary for us to have experience, but so are the concepts. And then hopefully he's going to combine, I mean, he will combine, hopefully we'll understand. He will combine these two up from page 150 to 174, in which he is actually going to demonstrate how these concepts, along with time, are necessary for us to have experience. So I'll change the thing for Saturday. I'm waiting for your papers / protocols on Saturday evening, and I'm waiting for your other protocols for Tuesday. And good luck, and keep reading. As you read further, your protocol will be even better. So don't think of these as trade-offs. So if you read further into the text, you will actually understand the project better. So don't think of it, oh, I need to do this, I cannot read, or something like that. You can do everything. It's not a lot reading, and it's not certainly not a lot writing. So good luck.
Could you tell us to which question you want answered in the next protocol?
All of them.
Like till 104?
Oh, yeah, time you don't need to maybe, I mean, if you write time, that'll be great. But if you don't, because, I mean, read it, and maybe you can, as you read up to page 104, you can continue writing your protocol for next week, and then you can include aspects of time in it too. So, I mean, I talked about it a little bit. It actually reflects space. If you read up to page 84, those 20 pages should be relatively easy to include in your protocol. So yeah, but yeah, try to finish your protocol, not try, do your protocol for Tuesday on transcendental aesthetic, knowing that you will have extra time to fix it for Thursday. Yes.
Do you said that we have to read until 1:50
Yes.
for Tuesday? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Uyan, you had a question. Sorry, you got cut off. I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, come closer.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is that in the reading questions, do we answer till transcendental aesthetic page 104?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Well, have a nice weekend. Stay healthy. I'll see you on Tuesday.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
Three.